Uh, as we have walked through this, we have taken many weeks now to navigate the years that Joseph was growing up, the precursor to his birth, and all of the drama and different things going on. Um, I had one person tell me that they went home from last week's Bible study and told their parents, "We're okay." He says, they were a mess. We're okay. And the reality of that whole dynamic of seeing some of the dysfunction and the challenges that the fathers of our faith have gone through, it can give us a reassurance that, you know what, we may have bad days, but at least that ain't happening. My daughter came across something that she invited me to watch with her this last week, and I remember saying, I think it was last week, that I have been accused of being a hoarder, and some of you have heard of the program called Hoarders, and that was the program. My daughter said, "Hey, Dad, you got to come down and watch this with me." So I went down there, and here's two things I learned. Number one, I am not a hoarder. Okay, and I was telling somebody, and they said, "You're probably more of a pack rat than a hoarder." And I said, "Okay, I can live with that. I tend to pack things, you know." But after watching several episodes of that, I have come to the conclusion I am not a hoarder. I could get there, but I am not there. Secondly, God has blessed me with a very wonderful wife, and she does a really good job making sure that there's more than just a path through the house. And so I stand before you today being very blessed and appreciate that. Which, by the way, little blurb here, her birthday is coming up, so she may be watching, so I may be in the doghouse, but that's all right. So think about that as your opportunity to pray for her and bless her. So anyway, all right. So chapter 36 is basically a genealogical record of Esau. And there's just a couple of things that I want to pull out of this, that in that context of why we have gone this far back when we talk about Joseph's struggle, to try to understand what he was exposed to, what he was born into, what he endured, the things he witnessed, the things he got to see his dad do, or the things he got to see his brothers do, or the things he participated in, are all part of what developed him ultimately into the young man that would fulfill the story that we are all well aware of. In chapter 36, in this idea of Joseph being a part of the family, these are some of the things that he would have been exposed to. Verse 1 of chapter 36 says, "Now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom." Now he is the father of the Edomites. The reason why that plays out in importance is because in the New Testament, there was an Edomite who sat on the throne when Jesus was born. Anybody know who that was? Herod. Herod was an Edomite. That really frustrated some of the people of authority who knew the scriptures, because he was not considered to be a legitimate kingly line. Therefore, he shouldn't be ruling. And we're not going to I could get into a lot more of that, but the reality of that whole setting way back then, or down the road, of Herod being a king over the children of Israel, it would grate. He was put there by the Romans, which was another grating. Okay, so I want you to just realize that that's kind of the mix of what's going on down the road. At this point, there's some things that we're going to go into here now, also, that tend to lend to that irritation. There was not a unity, even though they reconciled, the brothers, and they were able to hug, and they were able to, be civil, and especially at their dad's passing, they were both there. There was tension. They were different, and they were definitively different. You had your hand raised. Oh, yeah. So notice this. This genealogy is the genealogy of Esau, who was the father of the Edomites. Verse 2, Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. Ada, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, Aholibama, how do you like that name? Aholibama, the daughter of Anaiah, the daughter of Zibeon, the Hivite, and Basemath, Ishmael's daughter. Now, all three of those clans were somewhat of a point of contention with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Number one, Abraham told his servant, I don't want Isaac marrying any of the women of this land. Go back to my kindred and find my son a wife. Rachel comes back. Jacob leaves his mother and father and goes back to his relatives and finds Rachel, marries Leah and Rachel. Therefore, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are distanced from the people of the land. So when Esau goes and marries the women of Canaan, it's not following the pattern. Ishmael doesn't marry in that lineage of Jacob and Laban and that line. He marries others. And we could go back to some of the references earlier. My point is this. There began to be a clear distinction, definition, a separation between what would be known as the children of Israel and all the rest of them. Does that make sense? Okay, so Ishmael. The New Testament calls Ishmael the son of the flesh. Canaan was the land that the Israelites were supposed to overrun, not intermarry. Remember in Exodus, when you get into the promised land, you don't intermarry with them. And here's Esau taking wives from the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, and multiple wives at that, and Ishmael. So I just want to point that out, that the reality of Esau in his choices, even though the reconciliation had been made, was a definitive part from what we would see in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as they chose their wives. The next thing I want us to note is in chapter 36, verses 6 and 7. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his house, his cattle and all his animals, and all his goods which he had gained in the land of Canaan, and went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. Now here's why they did it in verse 7. For their possessions were too great for them to dwell together, and the land where they were strangers could not support them because of their livestock. Now, does that ring a bell? Had that ever happened before? When did it happen? Abraham and Lot. They were so prosperous that Abraham finally said to Lot, listen, you choose. Wherever you go that way, I'll go this way. What do we see happening? Esau and Jacob sit down and say, hey, look, your camels, your horses, your donkeys, you're having great success. And you are too, brother. Man, we are just being blessed. And you know what? The land can't hold us. Esau says, I'll leave. He left the pattern in marriage. He left the land of the promise. When Esau gave up his birthright, it was easy to give up the family. Just note that. These are things that the other day a young person came up to me and says, you have a really great talent of taking 5 verses and making a long sermon out of them. I said, well, there's a lot of stuff underneath there that you can just read the story if you want. But yeah, but there's some stuff in there that if you know the whole story, it's a little bit more than just a sentence, and it's just a little bit more. So I want you to notice that Esau, in this chapter, as it declares his genealogy, it declares his separation from what his grandpa, great-grandpa, and his dad would be ultimately known for. The next verse I want us to look at real quick is the last verse. And I mentioned this earlier, so I'm just going to make comment. It lists several different of the chiefs of the descendants of Esau, and these are the chiefs of Edom, according to their dwelling places in the land of their possession. Esau was the father, the very last line there, Esau was the father of the Edomites. And again, that ties us right into when the birth, in the days of Herod the king, Christ was born. This whole idea that ultimately the fulfillment, do you remember when Esau and Jacob were wrestling in the womb? And Rebekah says, I don't know what's going on. And Isaac says, I don't either. And the Lord says to her, there's 2 nations battling, in a sense, battling in your womb. And the older will serve the younger. That whole prophetic thing is challenged all the way to the birth of Christ. And it's in the birth of Christ that fulfillment, the King of Kings, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, would ultimately fulfill that prophecy. One of the reasons that's important is because tonight, as we step into Joseph's life, his story that we're all familiar with, we will see a prophetic display that will take years to ultimately fulfill. And it's one of the lessons that we learn from this is when God tells you something, it may not happen just like that. That there is this process through which he often takes us to prepare us for what's coming. Any questions, comments on chapter 36? Again, we didn't get into, there's a whole bunch of names in there. There's all kinds of different things. But I hope that brings chapter 36 to a little bit more clarity, that you can understand why the genealogy and all that is listed. Okay, so we are going to step into chapter 37 now. And it starts this way. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. Bless you. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah and his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. How many of you have ever been accused of being a tattletale? How many of you have ever been tattled on? Okay. So tonight, as we start this, the very first thing we see about Joseph is not that he was the favorite of his father. It's not that he was the firstborn of Rachel. It's he told on his brothers. He brings to them, to his dad, a bad report. And I would venture to say that the majority of people who know the story of Joseph would not think of Joseph as a tattletale. But he was. Now, we don't know exactly how bad the report was. However, you have walked with me through these 11 boys, and they can do some pretty bad stuff, right? So we don't know exactly what Joseph comes to his dad, who's now Israel, not Jacob, but Israel, and says, Dad, no, wait a minute. I can see it this way. He comes in and he's bothered. And his dad, who knows his boy, says, what's wrong? And maybe Joseph does this first. Nothing. It's nothing. His dad says, nah, come on. I know you. Don't lie to me. There's something going on. What's eating at you? No, nothing. Or maybe he just burst into the tent and said, Dad, you are not going to believe what those boys are doing. Okay, now you choose whichever one you want. He's 17 years old, okay? Now, how many of you have ever been 17-year-old and you just knew it was your right to tell what everybody else was doing wrong, okay? We know he's 17. We know his brothers can do some really crazy and horrible stuff, and he now is eyewitness or he's aware of something, and he comes to his dad, and he's going to tell him. My dad often told us, with 7 kids, you got the potential for a lot of sheriffs. And my dad would tell us when we have our little arguments, he says, let me be the sheriff, okay? I'll be the one to bring the law down. But the reality of this setting is you already have tension, and we've walked through several of the tense moments that preceded this. You add this little story in there, it sets the stage for what we're going to see next. On top of being a tattletale, the next verse, verse 3, says, Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. Now, ain't that special? What's wrong with a dad loving one of his boys? One of his sons is his favorite. It was the love of his life, and she's passed away, and now he's got Joseph, and he wants Joseph to know how much he loves him. And so he has something very special that none of the other boys, not even Dinah, the girl, the only girl, gets. A coat of many colors. Then there's that conjunction, the 3-letter word but. And it lets us know that something may be changing. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers. In other words, they were all on the same page. Daddy doesn't like us like he likes Joseph. There was nothing they could do about it. But jealousy was getting in there. Number 1, he was a tattletale. Number 2, he was daddy's pet. Number 3, he got a robe that every time they saw it reminded them about how special they weren't. Didn't remind them about how special he was. It reminded them about how special he wasn't. They weren't. And I want to take a moment here and help us realize, as parents, sometimes when we try to do something for our children, what's not said is sometimes more damaging than what is said. And to all of us, as brothers and sisters in the Lord, there are times when we in all innocence, try to promote something. It's not what was said, it's what wasn't said. And there's a good lesson out of this in this whole setting. It provides an opportunity for the enemy to come in, and I'm convinced that that's what's happening here. Now, before I give the devil too much credit, realize that in the bigger scheme of things, There's a working together of all things, even people's jealousy. And we'll see this coming to fruit as we walk through this. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now, real quick, that is a level of hate that is not surface. The jealousy aspect is absolutely there, but notice the text when it says they could not even speak to him. In other words, I can't even stand to be around that person. Now, we've all had, I know none of you are like that, but I've had situations where I would just rather, do I dare say this? I would rather be in another room if they're going to be there. I'd rather walk on the other side of the street. Matter of fact, since we're confessing, you ready? How many of you ever seen somebody before they saw you and you went the other way? Okay, so we all know what's happening here, okay? When they saw Joseph coming, they were like, I don't even trust myself to be close to them. I can't even speak nice when I get around. So are you with me? This is the degree that was going on, the turmoil, the dysfunction, the challenge. And what was at the root of it? Well, you had a 17-year-old who was highly favored, who was blessed, and his daddy made sure that everybody knew how special he was. Favoritism, it's got its blessings, but it's got its curses too, right? Now, Joseph had a dream. And being 17, okay, remember how old he is? Being 17 and having a dream is not rare. But being 17 and having this dream, there was something different in Joseph's mind, and he wanted everybody to know how special he was. Or maybe, I was reading some commentary on this, maybe he was just innocently excited. Man, you guys are not going to believe what happened to me last night. Now, it'd be one thing if they were excited to see him there. It's a whole other thing when before he even opens his mouth, they're like, biting their tongue. Joseph says, I had a dream. And before we even hear the dream, verse 5 ends by saying, and they hated him even more. Now, sometimes in the Bible, when we read a verse, it tells us what happens before what happens. And this is one of those verses where it kind of tells us he had a dream, he told it to his brothers, and the result was they didn't like it. Then it goes back and tells us what the dream was so we can understand why they wouldn't have liked him in his dream. Verse 7 says, or verse 6, so he told to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. So let me stop right here real quick, and I apologize if I'm stopping too much, but I want you to really understand, maybe for the first time, the degree that is brewing underneath, because you know the story. There's some really horrible things coming. How did they get to that point? Well, dad's favoritism, tattletale, and then the coat. All of those were working together to ultimately bring about what was going to happen. So when Jacob says to them, I've had this dream. Please listen to this dream. They don't want to talk to him anyway. They really don't want him around. But you're going to see here, they honor his request to listen to the dream. Not just once, but twice. Here's the first dream. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. Do you think his voice had changed yet? You know how puberty has the ability to... Or do you think maybe his voice was still, hey, let me tell you what I had last night. I had this dream, and we were out in the field. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it didn't happen quite like that, but in my mind, I can hear, even if he had already gone through puberty, his voice was irritating. And for him to tell the dream about how he rose up, his sheaf rose up, and their sheaves bowed down. Talk about salt on a wound, okay? Talk about vinegar. Talk about the on top of the on top of the on top of the tattletale. I hope you're getting it tonight, and maybe I could stop, but ugh. His brothers did talk. In verse 8, they said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now, how much can you hate? But evidently, they not only hated him, they hated him. It was adding up. It was stacking up. They say that anger can become rage. And rage can become a blind rage, where you are just functioning, and I've heard this, I don't know that I've ever been there myself, you are doing things out of rage or anger or emotion. You don't even realize what you're doing. I think we're seeing what preceded the ultimate event that's going to end our chapter tonight, and I hope you're seeing how it just kept adding on. These 11 brothers kept having situations that kept on. It was like throwing another log on the fire, and it was getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And so when Joseph comes and he says, I had this dream, can you take the time to listen to my dream? And then he doesn't, I don't know that he ever gave him a chance to say, no, we don't want to hear it. He's like, no, I got to tell you, we were all in the field and we were doing our sheaves, and then my sheaf rose up and your sheaves bowed down. And doesn't say he ever explained it. They step in and say, what are you talking about? They interpreted the dream. They interpreted the dream as he was going to rule over them. They were going to bow down to him. Well, in their minds, he was already elevated. Daddy put him on the throne, right, of his heart. Daddy gave him royal robes. Daddy put him. So what does God do? Gives him another dream. And this time, the questions that the brothers had, are you going to have dominion over us? See, the first one was natural, the grain, the sheaves, the provision, the food. We know how it's all fulfilled, but in that moment, it was just like, okay, this is what we do. We collect our sheaves, and God was somehow setting the stage for, in the natural, for them to understand that your brother's pretty special. He's gonna be raised up, and y'all are going to bow down to him. And they're like, no, we're not going to bow down to him, you boiled brat. You wait till Dad's not looking. Matter of fact, I saw something today that had a little meme that says hashtag sibling day, and it had a picture of Joseph being lowered down in the pit by his brothers. Now, we've all heard of sibling rivalries, okay? We are reading live and in color the challenge of this family, which I get it. We could read the whole story. We could have been done with the story 3 weeks ago, okay? It could have been over. But if you understand all that this is going on, it allows us to see, you know what? I got some bad things in my life, but man, Joseph really had some challenges. And so did his brothers. His brothers had a constant reality of how are we going to deal with not liking our brother. And he keeps throwing stuff on the fire. We didn't ask him to tell us his dreams. He volunteered. So when they asked the question, shall you indeed have dominion over us? Joseph has another dream. Verse 9. Then he dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. Now, the first one was natural, right? The earth produces grain, the grain gets put in sheaves, the sheaves bow down. You don't control the stars. That's a supernatural kind of dream. It's like, wow, they didn't understand the sun. They didn't understand the moon like we do today. They didn't understand the stars like we do today. There was a sense of mystery. Matter of fact, whole countries and cultures would be consumed in worship of the sun and worship of the moon and worship of the stars. And so now, Joseph's got this dream which takes it out of the natural realm, throws it into the supernatural realm. And notice, if you will, there's a moon, there's a sun, there's stars. What's Joseph? It's just Joseph. Now, I don't know, I've never drawn this out, but can you imagine the sun and the moon and 11 stars around a 17-year-old with a coat of many colors? That's what Joseph's telling his brothers. They asked the question, are you saying that you are going to have dominion over us? And he says, hey, guess what? I had another dream about that question you had. Try this one. You're a star. You are awesome. But you're going to bow to me. Now, I know I've taken way too much time on this, but I hope you can embrace this reality that the promotion of Joseph was not appreciated by his family. What did Jesus say when he couldn't do very many miracles in his own hometown? He ended up going, but what did he say? What did he say about it? A prophet is not without honor. Matter of fact, a prophet is honored except in his own home, his own family. There's a wrestling match that happens when God raises up an individual, not in the rest of the people, but in the family. And I think this is something that we can say. If God's got a call in your life, the people who may be most excited for you may not be your family. And in Joseph's case, it wasn't his family. Especially his brothers, okay? We don't know how Leah handled this. We don't know how the rest of the family, Dinah, we don't know what she was doing. But we do know what the brothers felt. And it was hate on top of hate on top of hate on top of hate. Verse 10. He tells it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebukes him. He said to him, "Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" In my preparation, there was some idea that Joseph was trying his best to navigate the emotions that were there. You've got a 17-year-old who's totally pumped about this dream. And I can almost hear him saying, "But Dad, it was so real. But Dad, couldn't it mean that?" And his dad's looking over Joseph's shoulder at the 11 boys who are standing there with arrows coming out of their eyes. And they're saying, "Over my dead body, am I going to bow to you, you tattletale?" Some think that maybe Joseph or Israel was rebuking the youthful ambition and saying, "Hey, you know what? I just don't see that happening." But first of all, who's Joseph's mom? Rachel. And according to what we read a couple weeks ago, she's dead. She coming back from the dead? I don't think so either. So then one commentator thought maybe it was a reference to Leah, who would have stepped into that role. But by the time this is actually fulfilled, Leah's not there either. So what does it mean that the first dream is sheaves? I think it's the natural, and it's the relationship with his brothers, that they're all in the field and his brother's sheaves bow down to him. He's going to be special. Then in the dream, it's not just his brothers. I would go so far as to say it may be symbolic of mother and father, the sun and the moon, but it's also symbolic of authorities. People who once had authority over him in their life would ultimately bow down to him in his ultimate position of authority. That makes sense? Now, I personally like that one. I haven't found any commentators to go with me, but I like that one because that's what we actually see happening in the fulfillment. We see the first dream being fulfilled when just his brothers are there. We see the other part of that being fulfilled when we see all the nations of the earth coming to Egypt to get grain, and they're bowing before Joseph. Those who were in authority around him at one point are now bowing before him. So the sun and the moon, while it could obviously Israel takes that as, "What do you mean, my father, your mother and I are going to bow down to you?" Yes, but it could be that idea of those who were once in authority over him, greater than his brothers, are now bowing down to him. Verse 11. His brothers envied him. Add envy to hate, and what do you get? Vengeance. That's what we're going to see coming up next. We're going to see when hate and envy come together, it cannot. One person said this: hate corrodes the container that carries it. I think that's what we're seeing. They're being eaten alive on the inside. And when you throw envy, it's like throwing hot sauce on an ulcer. It's not getting better, okay? It's not getting better. However, the last part of this, but his father kept the matter in mind. That's why I think that maybe Israel's rebuke of Joseph was more for the brother's sake, because he's like, I know my boy's special. He's got a coat. He's the son of my old age. God's going to do something great in his life. I can just feel it. It's in my bones. But then he sees the eyes of the older brothers, and he's like, okay, we got to calm this down. Verse 12, then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. Now you know where Shechem is, right? Shechem is the city of dead men. Dinah? That's Shechem. And the boys are all over in Shechem. They had plundered the whole city. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, here I am. Then he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Let me put this in another way. Hey, Tattletale, come here. Aren't your brothers and my flocks over there? I need somebody who's going to come back and tell me just exactly what's going on. Would you go, Tattletale? Would you go, Joseph, and go and then bring me back a report? Talk about a setup. But you know what? Israel's old. He's maybe not thinking clearly or whatever, but he kind of sets his son up for what's coming. Or we got a chance to say, you know what? God is sovereignly putting things together. And it's not always pleasant. But when it's done, what they meant for evil, God meant for good. Are you with me? Okay, here we go. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? So he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, they have departed from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they considered against him to kill him. Envy mixed with hate is going to produce some kind of action. They said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. How could they get to that point? Because it ate him out. Hate corrodes the container that carries it. Pretty soon you can't even see straight. So you begin to devise. Verse 21, when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. Now, Reuben presents himself as someone who's still trying to navigate this with some element of respect for his father, some grain of thought about this is family. I don't like him either, but we can't go that far. And so Reuben's devising this plan on how to work with his brothers to forego their immediate plan so he can create another plan or a way of escape. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. And then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. I love this next verse. And they sat down to eat a meal. I'm hungry. Man, we've done a good day's work here. My brother's in the pit. We were going to kill him, but Reuben talked us out of it. Now, just to help us maybe understand a little bit of Reuben's compassion. Do you remember the last time Reuben is mentioned?
He was hanging out with his mama's buddy.
Handmaid. And there was an indiscretion. There was an immorality. It makes me wonder if maybe Reuben was thinking, Dad doesn't like me very much. I had a weak moment. I did things I shouldn't have done. Maybe if I save Joseph, I can rebuild some of that. Now, I don't know that for sure. It's not in there, but it bears out. When you're wrestling with guilt, even if you hate something and you can see a way to restore something, sometimes you'll buck the crowd. You'll let the other 10 go on with their plan, but you're thinking, how can I get this to work for my good? So while they're having a meal, Joseph's in the pit. Now, my mom told me years ago that some preacher told her PIT stands for Prophet in Training. Isn't it interesting how God shows Joseph the grandeur of his future, but doesn't show him the journey along the way? Can you imagine him? Okay, ready? I got to do this just for a little bit. Joseph comes to his brothers, and he says, hey, I had a dream last night. Let me tell you, please listen as I tell you this dream. I had a dream that you guys were in Dothan, and you're watching your flocks. And I start to come up, and you guys grab me, and you tear off my coat of many colors, and you throw me in the pit like you're going to kill me. No, we wouldn't do that. We don't like you, but we wouldn't do that. It's not the dream that he had, was it? Or can you imagine him saying, yeah, I had this dream that I was a slave in Egypt. And they're like, yeah, that'd be a good idea. Why don't you go to Egypt? Because they didn't like him. But we wouldn't do that. That's not the dream he had. Because of the dreams he did have, it set the stage for that envy and that hate to ultimately come into an action. As they're eating, they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites. How convenient. It's family, right? Didn't we read that? Esau married some Ishmaelites, and so we're all family. Coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill him? This is where sometimes the Jewish nation gets accused of being entrepreneurs even to their own hurt. Okay? Always looking to turn a little bit of money or make a deal or do something along that line. Judah says, hey man, we can make some money out of this. Verse 27, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Now, all of the brothers listened except for one. You're gonna see this coming up a little bit. I don't know where he went, but there was one who wasn't there when they were discussing this. Then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph out and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Verse 29, then Reuben returned. Where was Reuben? I don't know, but he was gone long enough for them to make a deal, get 20 shekels of silver. But it's almost the idea that Reuben says, hey, let's not kill him. Come on, well, let's just put him in the pit. And he had plans. He was gonna do something, let him go, get him back to his dad. Maybe to rebuild that relationship, maybe to earn some favor back. But whatever happens, he has to leave. And while he's gone, Judah says, make some money. We didn't kill him. We just sold him. Judah and Reuben comes back, his plans messed up. Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and where shall I go? To me, this lends itself to what I talked about earlier about Reuben was trying to figure out a way to reconcile, to regain some of the relationship with his dad. And now that his plan was foiled, he basically says, this is strike two. And not only is he gone, but now I got to go back and try to explain this.
It seems to me like Reuben is the nicer of the other ones. Am I right on that?
He appears to have some conscience still. Yeah. But how much of it is guilt? How much of it is working out, trying to figure out how to cover up or how to rebuild something that was broken? We don't know, but yes, he does appear to becoming a little bit more humanized, a little more compassion. Verse 31, so they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, sin usually doesn't end unless repentance takes place. It keeps getting worse. They lied. Well, they didn't really lie. They found it the next day on the ground, right, where they had thrown it. And then they asked a rhetorical question. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? Can you verify that this is Joseph's? They knew it was Joseph's. What were they doing? They were setting the stage for the dad to come to his own conclusion without having to share any details. So here's what Joseph does, or Israel. He recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Notice this, if you will. Israel guesses at what had happened. Instead of turning to the boys and saying, you found it, where? Where did you find it? Did you see an animal? There was no investigation. Israel just says, I know what happened. And it's not what happened at all. This is Jacob, right? The one who saw the ladder? The one that the angels showed up? The one that wrestled with God? And in this moment where he recognizes his son's tunic and it's got blood all over it, there's no, I need to pray about this. I need to ask God what happened here. Because you know those boys would have been, oh boy, we better fess up. Because God will tell on you. But instead, Israel jumps to the conclusion, and the boys don't have to say anything. Then Jacob tore his clothes. Now notice it's Jacob, not Israel. The idea here is Israel is the new name given. Jacob is the old name. There was a real tie that was still connected to them. Remember Deborah, the nurse, dies? That connection to the past? Jacob tears his clothes. He didn't ask God what happened. He was functioning out of his humanity, out of what he knew, his past experience, his past knowledge, everything he knew from the past, and animals and coats that had blood on them was all about a wild beast who tore, and there's no way he could have lived based on what he saw. Everything was from his own perspective, not the perspective of God. He tears his clothes, he puts sackcloth on his waist, and he mourns for his son many days. And verse 35, the gall of these brothers. Notice, and all his sons, that's Reuben included, and all his daughters arose to comfort him. Can you imagine? Now the daughters weren't there. The sons, they know what happened. The daughters, they're going along with Jacob, Israel. Oh, this is so bad. I can't believe Joseph's gone. Ah. And the boys are like, yeah, this is really bad. This is really bad. Oh, man. This is really bad. This is really bad. Oh, my heart. I can almost hear them saying, oh, my heart breaks. Not for Joseph. Breaks for their dad. Maybe. Breaks under the weight of guilt that they would live under. Every day they saw their dad grieving, it had their names written all over it. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. We see Joseph committing himself to a grief without comfort. Who's he trusting? Himself. The only way he sees to handle this situation is to grieve. Legitimate? Yes. I'm not trying to take anything away from that parent who loses a child and just wrestles to make it through, to smile again, to live again, to go forward. I'm not taking anything away from the hurdles and the challenges of that. But there is some point at which we have to rest on a God who is bigger than the wild animals. There's a point at which we got to rest on something greater than what we understand in our experience. Jacob, you got a new name. Have you talked to God about this? No, I'm just going to grieve. There's no way I can get over this. I've heard people say this, I will never forgive. Who are you trusting? Yourself. Jacob, that's who you were. But who are you now? You're Israel. And if God told you that you're going to have nations and tribes, can you hold on to the promise in the midst of defeat? When it doesn't go your way? Real quick, 7 things that we can draw from this experience that Joseph went through. Number 1, dreams can tell the future and be prophetic. Absolutely. We need to hold on to that. There are some people who today are minimizing God's ability to speak through us or to us through dreams. God doesn't change. He can still speak to us. Matter of fact, the Muslim world is experiencing great revival because they're seeing in their dreams at night visions and dreams of nail print hands. And they don't have to see the face. They don't have to see anything else. They know it's Jesus. And there's conversion after conversion taking place simply because God still speaks to people through dreams. Dreams can reveal your calling. Joseph, you are going to eventually arise to a place of great significance, greater than your brothers, greater than your mother and father even. Number 3, dream interpretation was common back then, and I am convinced it can still be common today. What happens, though, is people have these dreams. Oh, I had a dream that I had $1 million. So they go play the lottery. I know I'm going to, have you ever heard that? I just got a good feeling. I had a dream last night. So they get these numbers, and pretty soon people are like, I can't pay attention to your dreams. And then when God does give them some dream, this really, all of a sudden it happens, and you're like, yeah, I dreamed about that. Yeah, right, yeah, you dreamed about that. No, really, I had a dream. And we begin to minimize when God does speak because of all the other stuff that takes place. Number 4, be careful about what you boast of. Just because God tells you doesn't mean everybody else needs to know. Joseph, at 17, he's going to tell everybody what happened. Be careful what we boast about. Number 5, not everyone will receive your calling. Just because God tells you you're going to have some great things happen doesn't mean everybody's going to get excited. We talked about that a little earlier. And the reality is, God will lead you in a way. Not everybody thinks that's the way. Not everybody thinks it's God. Not everybody thinks it's you. I vividly remember my wife 20-some years ago when the Lord specifically spoke about coming to here. My wife said, I just don't see it. I had a choice to make. Which way am I going to go? Now, between that time and the time we ultimately moved here, several things happened to line up, but she would probably tell you today, I still don't see my husband as a pastor. Well, okay. Lord, heal her eyes. But the reality is, sometimes the people closest to us, they're not going to see it, and they're not going to get excited about what God has showed us. Number 6, your timing is not God's timing. When God sets some things in motion, remember, he's outside of time. He sees the whole parade. He knows what's coming in 40 years. You only know what's happening the next week. And sometimes not even that. But he's got the whole picture. And just because he tells us the last part doesn't mean we've got it all figured out. And that's number 7. Some of the life lessons that we can learn from Joseph's story is we only see part of it. When he was dreaming, he saw grandeur, power. position. What do you think he was seeing when he was in the pit? Betrayal, hate, envy. What do you think he was seeing as he's got his hands tied? As my picture is as he's being sold, his hands tied, and he's being led away across the desert. And he looks back. Hey, I'll be back. You watch, your sheaves are going to still bow. You watch, you may be a star, but you're going to bow to me. I think he was broken. I think there was some humbling going on. There was some of these questions. Why? Like when a bomb, or when a bunch of stuff stored in Lebanon, the bay, it blows up and people die. Why? When the coronavirus comes along and destroys, why? When things don't work out like we think in our relationships or our friendships, why? Will I be Jacob or will I be Israel? Last thing, we're going to skip chapter 38, and I want to go to chapter 39, if you want to bring this up for me. Sets the stage for next week. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Please notice the first part of this next verse. The Lord was with Joseph. Who wrote that? As far as we know, is Moses. Is Moses writing this because he knows the whole story? And he says, yeah, it was tough. All this hate, all this envy. But he was successful. The Lord was with him. He was a successful man. Here's what I'd like to propose. Somehow in that journey, as he's being led away as a slave, Joseph begins to wrestle with the doubt and the fear. He begins to struggle with what he knows God showed him and what he sees right in front of him. And he's got a choice to make. He can drop to the same level as his brothers and begin to hate. He's got every reason. He can drop to the same level and begin to envy. They get to go home. I'm going somewhere I don't even know. They're free. I'm a slave. And you can almost see the hate begin to well up in him. But somehow, in that long journey, as a sold out brother, I want to believe that he began to rehearse the things he had witnessed in his own family. The stories he heard his dad tell about the ladder after he tricked his brother and his dad. The story he told about how the sheep and the animals became prosperous. The stories he told about the angels that showed up when Grandpa Laban and they made that covenant. The stories his dad told him about wrestling with God and the struggle all night. And I wonder if on that journey, long before he would ever say to his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, the Lord was with him. Something bigger than his circumstances began to rise up And he was able to embrace the situation as a slave and be a blessing to his master. And it wasn't just Moses saying, man, he was successful. The Lord must have really been with him. It was Joseph saying, the only way I could take my situation and be a blessing is because the Lord was with me. I am convinced in 2020 we have an opportunity to look at our circumstances and get hateful, get envious. We can ask the questions why. We can respond with our old nature and all that we know, or in our journey through 2020, we can say, I don't know how this is going to end, but I know that in order to end the way I need to remember that the Lord is with me. Amen? Amen. Lord, what a story. What a wonderful declaration of your greatness, which is greater than our dysfunction. It's greater than our hate. It's greater than, oh, mercy, all of the emotions. Thank you for your long suffering. Thank you for your patience, your loving kindness. Lord, tonight as we walk through this, I pray we would learn the life lessons that we need to learn and draw out, that we would learn from these things that have been preserved for us and grow in grace and the knowledge of who you are. Lord, if there's any hate within us, let it be revealed, reconciled, and let us be restored. That our relationships not be stumbling blocks, but let them be opportunities for your great grace. We need you, Jesus. We know these things have been preserved for our instruction, our learning. So, Lord, let us learn. And in this day that we live, where there's so many different things happening, help us to live our lives in such a way that we know you are with us. And let it be such a powerful part of our lives that others will know that the Lord is with us. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for your rod and your staff, they comfort me, and you are there. Thank you, Jesus. Lead us now, Lord, as we walk from this place. Be close to us. As we head to the hills, be close to us. As we lay our heads down tonight to rest, be close to us. And let us be close to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.